I'm Daphne Greenberg from Georgia State University. I have been working in the area of adult literacy since about the mid-1980s, early 1990s, in the area of research, teaching, community development, working with programs, giving technical assistance, et cetera, et cetera. Iris Feinberg, who's a colleague of mine, helped me with this presentation today. She regrets that she cannot be here. We're both the directors of the Adult Literacy Research Center over at Georgia State University, and in the last slide that you'll see from my presentation, I have the URL, the website for that, if you're interested in the work that we do. I also just wanted to quickly mention the Center for the Study of Adult Literacy at Georgia State University. Many of you may not realize that we actually have a national research center that focuses only on adult literacy at Georgia State. I'm the principal investigator of that center. It's a 5-year grant. We're currently in our no-cost extension year. It was $10 million. It is the only national research center. So we're very excited about that for Georgia. I think that my presentation is a nice balance to Beverly's. It kind of gives an overview of adult literacy to help us bring us all to speed in terms of what adult literacy is all about. So I figured we should first start with a definition. There are many definitions out there, but I decided to pick one that relates to a survey that I'm going to talk about in a moment. But they all seem to have more or less the same elements to them. And if you notice up here, I don't know if there's, it doesn't matter, the verbs, identify, understand, etc. Literacy in the area of adult literacy is not just reading. Many verbs up there. I want to focus on communicate. Communication is a very important part of literacy. Oral communication, written communication. A lot of our adults, whether they are native speakers or non-native speakers, have difficulty with advanced oral communication, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Compute, mathematics. And I want to focus on the last two parts of that definition. Achieve one's goals and develop one's knowledge and potential. Adults have different goals and have different potentials. And it's very important in adult literacy to acknowledge that. Because adults usually, not always, but usually are there because they're voluntarily attending. If you don't address their goals and their needs, they're going to leave. Same, I always tell my students, if I had to attend an adult literacy program for my needs, it would be to learn how to read educational psychology journal articles. If I went to a class that focused on physics articles, I would leave. I don't need to know that. And that's something that adult literacy practitioners know very well. So there was an international survey done a few years ago. This was the first time that the United States participated in it. And it was done with the OECD countries. We ranked number 13 out of 22 countries that were involved in the survey in reading. We ranked number 18 in math out of 22 countries. And we were 18 out of 18 in what a lot of people in the room would think about digital and computer literacy problems. So it's not just in the state of Georgia that we have adult literacy issues, it is in the whole country. To hit it home more, I just put up these statistics. So for the top level, which most of us, if not all of us in the room are in, only 13% of the United States is at that level in reading, only 10% in numeracy, and only 5% in digital or computer literacy. At the lowest end, that is having 5th grade and below levels in reading, in our country, 18% of us are at the lowest levels. 28% in terms of math, and a whopping 64% in problem solving in technology-rich environments, or as I said, the digital computer literacy. So as Beverly mentioned, one of the things that I tell my students all the time, if you go visit an adult literacy classroom, you will see in that classroom a representative of who is in that neighborhood. So if you are, for example, in inner city Atlanta, probably the majority of the students in the classroom are going to be African American. If you go down to rural Georgia, in some area that is mainly Caucasian, that is who you're going to see in the classroom. If you go down a neighborhood which has a high immigrant community, that's who you're going to see in the classroom. They also have a lot of different backgrounds, which makes it very difficult in terms of trying to understand the population. I named some of them, and I just wanted to highlight some. So recent high school dropouts, means that they're young. So they could be sitting in the same classroom side by side with an 80-year-old. Very different needs, very different skills. Or not, it all depends. We have non-English speakers, we have prison inmates, we have high school graduates. Depending on the article that you read and where the research was done, anywhere from 20 to 25% of research subjects who are in adult literacy classrooms who are reading below the 5th grade and lower are actually high school graduates. It says something a little bit about our school system. So some of them are high school graduates and some are not. Okay, what needs do they have? And one of the purposes of my talk today is to really try to lay out how complex the field is. It's much more complicated than your typical K through 12 system, which is why it is hard to really pinpoint what adult literacy is all about. So for example, you will have students that come to your classroom who have decoding problems. That means they have problems sounding out words that they do not know. If we can get the kids when they're young, before the 3rd, 4th grade, and get their decoding skills up, then they probably won't be coming to our adult literacy programs. But we also know that there are a lot of children who do very well in school until about the 3rd and 4th grade level. They master the decoding skills, but they fall apart when it comes to comprehension skills. And so then they start to have difficulties in the middle school grades and in the high school grades because they do not have the comprehension abilities to understand the content information. And so we can't just think that if we solve the preschool through 3rd grade problem that we won't have adults in the future who will have reading needs. That's not true, because there are reading skills that one develops in middle school and high school that a lot of people have difficulty with. We have students that come in with both areas of difficulty, right, in decoding comprehension. Then of course there's math, there's writing, the oral language that I mentioned before. So we have a lot of non-native English speakers, but I also want to alert you to the native English speakers. Our oral language is very, very tied to our reading levels. So if you are reading at the 5th grade level, your oral vocabulary knowledge and syntax knowledge is going to be very similar to a 5th grade child, with some exceptions. Obviously, there are going to be some adult words that you know because of life experiences. So, for example, if you have diabetes, you might be able to read the word diabetes, you might be able to read the word insulin, which a 3rd grade child would not be able to read. But you will not be able to read the other words around those words. So oral vocabulary is something that's very important. I'll talk about background knowledge and reasoning skills in a moment. Content areas. Our students who are more advanced or want to get more advanced need help with social studies, science, all of the different content areas. Digital literacy is a big one. Our younger students may know how to use a mouse, may know how to turn on the computer, et cetera, but they may have difficulty surfing the internet. Our older students have difficulty turning on the computer and using the mouse. Integration of skills. It's not enough to know how to do different things. It's the integration that makes us automatic and fluent. And then last but not least, there are whole kinds of non-academic issues that they bring that Beverly alluded to. Some children drop out of school because they were bullied. Some have social phobias. Some just got very anxious in school. Some students got pregnant. Some joined gangs. I mean, there are a whole host of reasons why people drop out, and they bring that baggage with them to the adult literacy program. Just wanted to hit home the types of things that you may not be considering when you're thinking about adults, because as I said, it's not just reading. So a few years ago, I did a study where I looked at adults who were reading below the 5th grade level, and I was just curious about their background knowledge and their reasoning skills. This indicates that on questions such as how many weeks are in a year, only 11% of these adults got the correct answer. Reasoning, some lobsters are red. Tony has a lobster, is it red? Only 20% got that right. You may be wondering, how can that be? Well, if you think about it, these are skills that are taught in the school system when we are children. And if you are reading at the 3rd or 4th or 5th grade level and you are now in 8th or 9th grade, you cannot keep up with all the reasoning that you're being taught. You can't keep up with all the background knowledge that you're being taught. So it becomes, it's like a domino effect. If you have difficulty in one year, it's going to affect your difficulty in getting more information the next year. Okay, so we talked a little bit about their needs. It gets even more complicated. There are all kinds of different instructional types. There's English as second language, basic skills, where you're learning like at about the 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade level, functioning skills, learning how to function everyday life, such as, let's say, a bus schedule. Pre-GEDs, more the middle school kind of stuff, GEDs, the high school. And then even if you get your GED or your high school diploma, a lot of students still need help at the early post-secondary system. And so they have developmental and remedial classes. Once again, a whole bunch of different approaches. There's family literacy, workplace literacy, community-oriented literacy. There are different groupings of instruction. There's one-to-one tutoring, there's small group tutoring. Adult literacy is not a one-size-fits-all, as K through 12 often is. And then there's the location of the programs. We have programs in technical colleges, community-based organizations, K through 12 schools, work sites, libraries, prisons, religious institutions, housing projects, homeless shelters. Every site has a different structure to it. And then the goal's different. Remember I mentioned goals? So some people have purely functional, daily kind of literacy tasks as goals. Others have spiritual goals. They want to be able to read religious materials. Pleasure. They want to be able to read for pleasure. Family, they want to help their child with homework. Job, economic advancement. They need the GED in order to get the job promotion. The quotes that I've gathered over the years from adult literacy students in classes point to these different kinds of goals. That somebody was really glad that they learned how to pronounce words, gain knowledge, understand advanced graphs and tables, surfing the internet, writing a memo, creating and following a simple budget, understanding social studies so that they can help their 8th grade child. So once again, it's a very complicated, complex area. So there's a paucity of money that's being thrown at adult literacy in our country compared to K through 12. This paucity is seen in research, in classes, in professional development, in infrastructure. But there are some things that we have known or have learned over the years. First of all, the good news is that adults can improve their skills. You know that myth, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Well, you can. We can learn as adults. That's the good news. But we do know from adult learning theory that it takes time. And society needs to understand that. The government needs to understand it. You cannot expect any adult to attain skills that takes a child from K through 12 to attain. It takes time. Explicit instruction is important. Our staff, our teachers, our practitioners are critical to the success of our adult learners. You can't just throw a workbook at an adult and say, okay, go for it. Or you can't just expose them to books and expect them to somehow soak it up. They need to be taught. We know that many learners attend, stop, and then come back or go to a different location. And that can be very frustrating. But we need to kind of embrace that because that is reality. In fact, a lot of us now talk about stop out instead of drop out. Because yes, adults have to leave, often because of these issues. Childcare issues, transportation issues, change in work schedules, getting evicted from housing, and other issues that might require some counseling. Our students are typically very, very, very motivated. They know the importance of gaining their skills, but they have a lot of other issues. And so what we find is that they drop out for a while and then come back when their situation improves. And we try to understand why some students persist and others don't. And that is also very complicated. I'm not going to go into the details of the study. I'm just putting this slide up there to show you some of the complexity. It's not a simple kind of thing where you just start to survey people. There are a whole bunch of interactions here, and it all depends on how long you're looking for. But just basically to know some examples of things that we need to look at are age, skill level, emotional issues, whether they have a history of attending classes, et cetera, et cetera. Georgia State University just created an interesting model that it's been very, very successful and maybe something that we may want to consider. So we have now a public-private partnership where we have actually a system in place to try to predict which students are going to have difficulty in getting their college diploma and are going to maybe eventually drop out as a result, and getting them at key points, intervening to make sure that that doesn't happen. And as a result, we have many, many more students graduating, and the biggest gains have been made with low-income students, minority students, and first-generation students. And this has been noted by the federal government as a model program. So in adult literacy, what should we do? It's very important to show a return on investment. Obviously, if we're asking for funds in adult literacy, where is it getting us? So Steve Reeder out in Portland, Oregon, did this amazing, rare kind of study. He looked longitudinally at over 10 years at two groups of students. He looked at a whole bunch of students that did not graduate from high school, and he followed them for 10 years. There was one group that attended adult literacy programs and one group did not. So they started off kind of the same. They dropped out of high school, but one chose to further their education through adult literacy, one did not. This is what he found. Attendees showed mean income gains of 53% compared to actually an income drop of the non-attendees. And those that attended more than 100 hours of instruction averaged $10,000 more in annual income and are twice as likely to have attained a high school equivalency credential, which we know is critical to then continue on in post-secondary or to get advancement in jobs. The federal government would love states to take this on. Rhode Island is the other state now that's just beginning to look into it, and it'd be great if Georgia did something like this as well. So that's a great segue to my recommendations. And I think it follows very nicely with some of the stuff that Beverly was talking about. It'd be great to have a, once again, because of this costs a lot of money, a public-private partnership to create a centralized clearinghouse, recruitment, hotline efforts, PSAs, and advertisements. And I can't stress enough the importance of including adult learners and adult literacy practitioners in the efforts. We know from both our efforts in the state and across the country that what works is to have adult learners in the actual PSAs and advertisements for two reasons. One, as Beverly mentioned, the best recruiting device is to have someone like me, if I were an adult literacy student, someone like me saying, hey, if I could do it, you can do it. That's the number one way to get students in. But it's also important for society to see that pouring in money into an adult literacy program makes a difference in people's lives. So just saying that there's a problem gets people very upset, and they may be, wondering what to do about it. But if you show that there is somebody that, as a result of going to this adult literacy program, now can help their child with homework, got a promotion at work, et cetera, that hits people really hard. So I really want to emphasize that if we can go down that route and include adult learners in our PSAs, that would be great. I think that collecting the kind of longitudinal data that I said that was being done out in Portland and now in Rhode Island is critical so that we can convince business to put money into adult literacy. I think that doing the same kind of thing with family literacy is also important to show what happens 10 years from now, both with the parent and the child. We did all these intensive services. What happened? We should try to track the students. Georgia State is one model. I'm sure there are other models out there to see what are the risk factors. We know quite a few of them: transportation, childcare, et cetera. And what can we do to actually intervene? So knowing that the problems exist is only one part of it. How do we change it? How do we make it possible that in spite of whatever problems exist, they can still come to class? Another issue is to ask business to really help fund computers and the internet access for adult literacy learners. Yes, a lot of programs have computers, have internet, but computers break down, computers get updated. Our programs are in desperate need for a constant source of more computers, more printers, the updated ones, and internet access is often slow in a lot of areas, and we need to get that much better. Because also, if you think about it, not everybody can always attend adult literacy programs. If they had the internet access in their neighborhoods, and they had computer access in their neighborhoods, in the libraries, in the school systems, et cetera, to access programs when they're able to. TCSG and the Adult Literacy Office has some great, really good online access for students to study math, study reading, et cetera, but if the students don't have access to the internet and to computers, that's a problem. It would be great if we could create and maintain a statewide advocacy system to promote adult literacy needs to legislators. We know that typically we don't have a year's notice that, oh, in 1 year from now, we're going to have this crisis of a cut in adult literacy education or GED funding or what have you. We don't usually have that. If we're lucky, we have a month, right? So if we have a system in place where people get alerts that write letters to your governor, write letters to your legislators, this is happening. That's what we need. And we know from previous efforts and in Georgia and also in the country that letter writing and visits to legislators work, right? Legislators look at what we write. And if we don't write to them, it's not on their radar screen. We all know that we don't know yet what the federal budget is going to be. Adult literacy could be cut. If that happens, I would like to recommend that the Commission asks the state to commit funds to keep our funding level the same, because it would be devastating to all the work that we're trying to do if not only do we not get an increase, but we get a decrease in funding. And last but not least, I would like to inspire businesses to provide funding for local programs that are not currently funded by federal and state funds. There are many reasons why they're not currently funded. One of the reasons is because they do not have the resources, the infrastructure, the staffing to be able to meet the accountability requirements that are in place for federally and state-funded programs. If businesses would fund them to get them to that point where they can compete and get funding, it would be a big help. Because right now we can't get to every single student. And so these local programs are critical in helping us get there, but they need to be accountable, they need to have more manpower, et cetera, and they just need a little bit of a push from the business community in order to get there. Would like to end with this slide. You have it on your handout. There is so much I could have talked about today, but I just wanted to give you some resources in case you want to find more information about what I mentioned. So this first one is a partnership between COABE and the adult state directors. And it is a real powerful resource to look for examples of PSAs, how to write letters, and what's going on in adult literacy in the nation. I did a TEDx talk on adult literacy advocacy. It's a 12-minute talk. I know that some states and some programs have used it for advocacy efforts. Feel free to use it if you find it helpful. National Centers for Family Learning is a really great resource for family literacy information. Pro-literacy is another good source for adult literacy information. The Program for International Assessment of Adult Literacy is that international survey that I talked about. People keep asking me for local data on behavioral measurements, because we know that high school diploma doesn't tell us enough. There are people who graduated, as I've talked about, from high school who don't have the necessary skills that one would expect from a high school graduate. So it's important to give reading tests and math tests and so forth to really get at their levels. So in 1993, when there was a national adult literacy survey, they figured out the local statistics for every state and county and congressional district. It is very old. That's why I'm not showing it today. But if you can't, now, so supposedly they've been promising this now for at least a year or two, so I don't even want to say how long it's going to take. But supposedly we are going to get that kind of data, at least state data, within the next year or so. But if you're interested in what was true in 1993, feel free to look at that. And then the last three are just some of the Georgia State initiatives that I mentioned in my first slide. So are there any questions?
So we know that we have an issue with barriers once we get them in the program. Are there any wraparound services or resources that we're getting or funding for the adult learning programs? Because we can build awareness, we can get funding, but one of the challenges that I see is keeping them in the program.
Right. So some programs actually have some funding that they can give students for transportation, if there is transportation in the community that will bring them to the program if they have transportation issues. Some programs also have childcare partnerships. WIOA, and Beverly, you may want to talk about that, is really all about that.
Yeah, the new WIOA law legislation that we have really does provide a lot of wraparound services. In addition to the CLCPs that we have, we are now required through that law to work with the workforce investment boards and the one-stops, Voc Rehab, and the TANF group. All of our goals now, the way the new law reads, are the same goals. We have the same targets nationally in terms of what we need to work on. So what George has really been a leader on, and Wendell Dallas has been a part of that in terms of what we're doing for the unified plan for the state. We have worked together for the past 2 years to try and implement that law so that our students are the same students that go to the one-stop, the same students that go to Voc Rehab. So we're trying to increase the wraparound services because we basically serve the same clients, to be honest with you. What doesn't make sense and hasn't in the past is that we haven't worked together to serve those same clients. So the targets and what we're working on now is how can we do that more efficiently and effectively by having common assessment forms, intake forms, so that we can identify them better. So with that and the CLCPs, we're able to do more to support that student. And whether they're in our programs or, quite frankly, whether they're in the secondary education system, in terms of the university system and their dev ed students, because they need that same support. So we're finding the same support that's needed for the students that Daphne talks about are the same support that is needed for our student to get them to move forward. So there's a huge effort to try and do what we can to make sure those wraparound services are there. That is one of those areas where your support and your help in terms of working with those wraparound services is critical, because we find that if students have that and they're motivated, they will start to achieve.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.